right then. Pay attention, because I am only going to say this once. And if you choose to ignore me, that is entirely your business. But do not come back to this channel afterwards complaining that nobody warned you. Ireland is a country that has been accumulating darkness for a very long time. Not the theatrical kind. Not the kind you see in American horror films, where the fog machine is visible and the music tells you precisely when to be frightened. The Irish kind of darkness is quieter than that, and considerably more patient, and it tends to live in small places where the houses are old and the locals have long stopped talking about certain things because some conversations are better left where they started, which is nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. Leinster, the eastern province, has its share of these places. So subscribe and let's start. Town number 10, Laragh, County Wicklow. Laragh is a small village in the Wicklow Mountains, sitting at the junction of four glacial valleys in the shadow of Glenmalure, the valley of the two lakes. And it is the kind of place that seems pleasant enough on a summer afternoon when the tourist buses are parked and the visitors are queuing for cream scones. Come back in November. Come back on a Tuesday in February when the mist is sitting in the valley at the height of the surrounding hills, and the light has that particular flat quality it gets in the Wicklow uplands when the cloud cover is total and you cannot determine where the sky ends and the mountain begins. Come back then and tell me that Laragh feels unremarkable. The unsettling reputation of this area begins, as so many Irish things do, with a saint behaving in a manner that would today require a formal inquiry. Saint Kevin, founder of the monastic city of Glendalough in the 6th century, is one of Ireland's most venerated holy men. He is also, according to the local folklore preserved in the Duchess d'Athboy School's manuscript collection, the man responsible for the ghost of Kathleen, a young woman who, depending on which version of the story you are told, was either thrown into the upper lake by Kevin after she pursued him romantically, or drowned after he beat her with stinging nettles and pushed her from the bank. The saint, it seems, had a remarkably direct approach to the inconvenience of female attention. Kathleen's ghost has been a feature of the Glenmalure Valley since the medieval period, reported by monks, pilgrims, and in more recent centuries by tourists who have photographed what they describe as a figure in a red dress, visible in the mist above the upper lake in photographs that subsequently show no such figure on review, which is, depending on your disposition, either reassuring or significantly worse. The valley itself has a quality that the most sensible of outdoor guides will eventually admit to. It absorbs sound strangely. The acoustics of the four glacial valleys meeting at Laragh create pockets of near total silence in places where you would expect ambient noise, and pockets of unexpected echo where sound carries with an unnerving clarity from distances that should make it inaudible. Walkers on the Wicklow Way frequently report the sensation of footsteps behind them in sections of trail where there is no one. The mountains here, Derrybawn, Mullaghcore, Lugduff, were mined for lead, copper, found on zinc throughout the 19th century, and the collapsed mine workings still honeycombing the valley sides give the ground beneath you a quality of uncertain solidity that, once you know about it, changes the way you walk. The village of Laragh itself is a handful of houses, a pub, a crossroads, and a scatter of guest houses for Glendalough walkers. The people who live there year-round have, in my experience, the quality of people who have made a conscious choice to live adjacent to something that most other people visit briefly and leave. A steady eye contact, a reluctance to elaborate on certain subjects, and the kind of equanimity in the face of strange questions that suggests they decided some time ago that the appropriate answer is a slight change of subject and a fresh cup of tea. Town number 9, Duncormick, County Wexford. County Wexford has Loftus Hall, which is famous, and Duncormick, which is not famous at all, which is precisely the problem if you happen to find yourself in a small rural village in the south of the county on a grey afternoon, with the wind coming in off the Irish Sea, and the kind of light that makes everything look slightly older than it is. Duncormick is a farming village with a medieval church ruin at its core, a scatter of houses along a crossroads, and the remains of a tower house that has been standing since the 15th century, and intends, it seems, to continue standing indefinitely whether the surrounding countryside finds this convenient or not. The local reputation of Duncormick for discomfort among outsiders is tied to two things. The first is its association with the Croppy Graves, the mass burial sites of the insurgents of the 1898 Wexford Rebellion, several of which are located in the fields around the village and are marked, at best, by a low mound and a rough stone, and more commonly by nothing at all except the knowledge, shared locally, that you are standing on something significant and unprocessed. The rebellion of 1798 was particularly brutal in this part of Wexford. The battles at Vinegar Hill and New Ross are the famous ones, but the surrounding countryside was the site of a campaign of reprisals by Crown forces that left thousands of local men dead in fields that are still farmed today by families whose ancestors remember exactly where the bodies are, in the way that certain kinds of memory survive even when there is no conscious intention to preserve them. The second element of Duncormick's reputation is its fairy fort. On the eastern outskirts of the village, it's a ring fort of Iron Age origin, sits in the middle of a field, and has never, to the knowledge of anyone in the immediate area, been disturbed by ploughing, drainage works, or any other agricultural interference, because the farmer on whose land it sits, and the farmer before him, and the farmer before that, Adam Mai Durrow, Utomber Papmert, all took the view that the correct approach to a structure that local folklore identifies as the residence of the IOC, the fairy folk of Irish tradition, is to leave it entirely alone and root all subsequent agricultural activity around it. This is not unusual in rural Ireland. What is unusual in Duncormick is that the fort sits in the middle of a field of otherwise excellent arable land and represents a not insignificant loss of usable acreage, and that the locals' explanation for this arrangement, when pressed, tends to amount to a shrug and the words, "You don't touch a place like that." The village has a pub. The pub has the atmosphere, common to all rural Wexford pubs, of being very quiet on weekday evenings and very well informed about the business of everyone in the surrounding 5 kilometres. A visitor asking questions about the local history will be answered politely, and then the subject will change. By the end of the second pint, it will be unclear whether the information received was complete or whether certain things were left out by mutual arrangement. Town number 8, Athboy, County Meath. Let me explain something about Meath that is not adequately communicated by the county's tourist marketing, which focuses, understandably, as on Newgrange and the passage tombs of the Brú na Boine, and the general proposition that this is a landscape of ancient grandeur, rather than a landscape of ancient grandeur that is simultaneously engaged in an unresolved conversation with the oldest religious traditions in the country. Athboy is a market town of approximately 3,000 people in the western part of Meath, and it has the distinction of being the location of the first great Samhain gathering in Irish history, more than 2,000 years ago. That is the official tourism description. The unofficial description, which you get from the people who have lived here for several generations, is that Athboy sits on what may be the most spiritually loaded piece of ground in Leinster, and that the Hill of Ward, Tlachtka, but on its outskirts, is the place where the Druids lit the sacred fire from which every household fire in Ireland was relit at the beginning of winter, and that this was not a quaint agricultural tradition, but a ceremony of enormous ritual weight, conducted in a location that was chosen deliberately because of what was already there, which was old and significant, and best not examined too closely. Tlachtka, the hill above Athboy, is named for a druidic goddess of the same name, who was, according to the mythological cycles, the daughter of the great druid Mog Ruth. The legend of her death on the hill. She was said to have been killed there, yet and her spirit, bound to the place, gives the hill a reputation among the people of Athboy that is never entirely dissipated, regardless of the centuries of Christianity that have passed over it. The Pusa Festival, Ireland's national Halloween celebration, now uses Athboy as one of its 2 bases, which suggests that even the tourism industry has tacitly acknowledged the appropriateness of the location, without necessarily articulating why. The town itself is unassuming. It has a main street, and a couple of pubs, a church, the medieval remains of a moat and bailey castle, and the general infrastructure of a small Irish market town. But the landscape around it has a quality that walkers who have been there on an October evening will recognise. The Hill of Ward, visible from everywhere in the town, the flatlands of Meath, stretching in every direction, with the kind of horizontal openness that makes the sky feel very large and very present. Buckowy. And a silence in the fields between the town and the hill that seems thicker than silence in most places, as though something is listening from the other direction. The October festival has brought welcome attention to Athboy in recent years, and the local community has embraced it with enthusiasm. But the locals who have always lived there, the ones who do not work for the festival and do not sell their ancestors' history to visitors, will tell you, if you ask at the right moment, that Tlachga is not something you visit at night, that the fire lighting was not symbolic, and that 2,000 years of Christian overlay has done nothing to change the fundamental character of the hill. They say this not with fear, but with the matter-of-fact tone of people who have incorporated an unusual neighbour into their daily routine and made a reasonable accommodation with it. Town number 7, Durrow, County Laois. Durrow is a small village in County Laois. I'm known to those who know it at all as the location of Castle Durrow, an 18th century country house of considerable architectural quality, now operating as a hotel, and to those who know it better as a village with a local reputation, preserved in the folklore collections and in the memory of the older people of the surrounding townlands, for the wailing. Not the wailing of wolves, which are extinct in Ireland since the early 18th century. The wailing of a banshee, the Beansea of Irish tradition, the spirit woman whose cry foretells the death of a member of certain old Gaelic families, which has been associated with Castle Durrow and the Flower family who built and occupied it since at least the 19th century, and which is still reported, occasionally and without elaboration, by people in the village who have no obvious reason to fabricate the claim, and no interest in the attention that making it publicly would attract. The Banshee of Durrow is specifically tied to the Flower family, and, by extension, to the history of the castle and its grounds. The Flowers were an Anglo-Irish landed family who occupied Castle Durrow from its construction in 1715 until the Land Acts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries broke up the estates of the Anglo-Irish gentry, and the traditions of the castle's supernatural associations predate their tenancy. They were attached to the Irish families who held this ground before them, suggesting that whatever it is that people in this area hear in the grounds of the castle on certain nights has been heard since before the current building was constructed, and will presumably continue to be heard long after the hotel has finished its current renovation. The village of Durrow itself is quiet, in a way that has nothing aggressive about it, but that an attentive visitor will notice, a quality of being slightly outside the normal frequency of rural Irish village life. The population is small. The surrounding countryside is the heavy, flat agricultural land of the Laois Midlands, which in winter takes on a darkness of its own that has nothing to do with the supernatural and everything to do with the sky. The ruined Durrow Abbey, founded by St. Colmcille in the 6th century and the original home of the Book of Durrow, one of the finest illuminated manuscripts in the world, now held in Trinity College, Dublin, is nearby, and its grounds have accumulated their own stories over 15 centuries of continuous religious significance. Local children, as a rule, do not use the Abbey grounds as a shortcut after dark. Not because anyone has told them not to, but because the custom has passed down through the school years in the way that local knowledge does, from older to younger, without documentation and without the need for it. Town number 6, Clonmines, County Wexford. Clonmines is not quite a village. It is the ghost of one, which is considerably worse. Situated in the mud flats of Bannow Bay in South County Wexford, it is described by archaeologists and heritage organisations as one of Ireland's best preserved medieval towns. And it is entirely abandoned, which means that the preservation in question is the preservation of emptiness rather than of life. The town was established in the 13th century by the Norman knight William Marshall, one of the most powerful men in the medieval world, as a port town on the Owenduff River. It grew over the following centuries to include 2 tower houses, the 2 fortified churches, an Augustinian friary, a Dominican friary, a Norman mutt, and a population that supported the kind of commercial and religious activity that characterized a functioning medieval settlement. Then the river silted up. The navigation failed. The town, deprived of its reason for existing in this particular spot, quietly emptied over the course of the 17th century, and what remains is the outline of everything that was there. The towers, the church walls, the friary ruins, the earthworks of the motte, all standing in a field of rough grass, surrounded by the tidal mudflats of Banno Bay, with no roads in except farm tracks, and no visitors except the ones who come specifically to find it, which are fewer than you might expect, and fewer than the site deserves. The experience of walking around Clonmines is not comfortably describable in the language of heritage tourism, which tends toward words like evocative and atmospheric. The accurate words are closer to wrong, and specifically wrong, and the kind of wrong that makes you want to establish, before you go any further, what time sunset is today, and how far you are from the nearest road. The scale of the ruins, 2 tower houses still standing to several stories, church walls enclosing spaces that still feel like interior space despite having no roof, is entirely disproportionate to the surrounding landscape, which is flat and empty, and slightly below the level of the surrounding bay at high tide in a way that suggests the ground itself is in the process of being reclaimed by the water that drove the town's founders away. The mud around the site at low tide is deep and black and makes a sound when you walk near it that I will not describe in further detail. The local knowledge about Clonmines, but preserved in the Wexford folk tradition and acknowledged by the older farming families whose land surrounds the site, is straightforward. You do not go there at night, you do not go there alone, and the foundations that have not yet been excavated, the larger portion of the medieval town, still buried under the grassland, are best left where they are. The specific reason given for this last point is usually unelaborated, but the consensus is that certain foundations contain things, not in the sense of artifacts, but in the sense in which an old Irish house is sometimes said to contain things, meaning that the boundary between what was there before and what replaced it has not been entirely successfully negotiated, and the terms of the current arrangement are not ones you want to disrupt. Subscribe. Not because I am asking, though I am asking. How subscribe? Because we are now at the halfway point of the most comprehensively unsettling tour of Leinster ever assembled on this particular platform. And the 5 remaining entries are, I want you to understand, worse than the first 5. The algorithm needs to know that content of this quality is wanted. Subscribe. Town number 5, Castledermot, County Kildare. County Kildare is best known to most people as the home of the Irish bloodstock industry, the flat grasslands of the Curragh, the stud farms, the racetrack, the money. This is the version of Kildare that appears on the covers of country living magazines and in the property supplements of the Sunday newspapers. There is another Kildare, which is the old Kildare, the pre-Norman Kildare, the Kildare of St. Brigid's Flame, and the Curragh Wraiths, and the plain that was, in the mythological tradition, the home of the horse goddess Epona and the hunting ground of the Fianna before cattle were introduced to complicate things. Castledermot is in this older Kildare, in the south of the county, and it has the distinction of containing within its townland boundaries an unusually high concentration of monuments from the period before the island's religious complexion changed, which is another way of saying that the ground around Castledermot has been considered significant for longer than Ireland has been Christian. The town itself has a round tower, a high cross of the early medieval period, the remains of a Franciscan friary, a granite Sheila na gig incorporated into the friary wall, a carved female figure of a type found throughout medieval Ireland whose precise function has been the subject of academic debate for a century, and whose local interpretation has never required academic intervention of any kind, and a Neolithic dolmen, the Kilkea dolmen, on the immediate edge of the settlement, which has been in this location since approximately 3000 BC, and whose presence within walking distance of the town centre gives the surrounding landscape a quality of temporal layering that, once you become aware of it, is difficult to stop noticing. The unsettling reputation of Castledermot among the locals of South Kildare is tied primarily to the Kilkea Castle, 2 kilometres to the northeast, where Gerald Fitzgerald, the 11th Earl of Kildare, known universally as the Wizard Earl because of his documented interest in alchemy and the black arts, is said to have practiced his experiments in the late 16th century. The room in which he is believed to have worked remains in the current hotel, accessible by the spiral staircase of the castle's main tower, and the local tradition that the Earl returns to the castle on horseback once every 7 years at midnight is so consistently described, as across so many separate accounts from different decades, that it has acquired the quality of an event rather than a legend. In July of 1984, a couple walking past the castle graveyard reported seeing the dark shape of a horseman on the grounds at a time consistent with the 7-year cycle as calculated from the earliest recorded version of the story. This was reported in the local press without derision. Town number 4. Ferns, County Wexford. Ferns is a village of approximately 900 people in North County Wexford, and it was, for a period between the 5th and 12th centuries, the capital of the Kingdom of Leinster. That is not a minor historical footnote. It means that the ground of Ferns has been carrying the weight of being the centre of something very large for a very long time, and the transition from capital of a kingdom to small village on the N11 has not been accomplished cleanly. There is too much still present. The cathedral, the castle, the high crosses, the saint's grave, the round tower stump, the earthworks of the old royal residence, Rathnaree, on the edge of the village. The total effect is of a place that cannot quite reconcile its current scale with what it knows about itself, and that communicates this irreconcilability in a way that visitors find either fascinating or deeply uncomfortable, depending on their disposition. The saint in question is Saint Aidan, who founded the monastery of Ferns in the 6th century at the request of the King of Leinster, and whose well, Saint Aidan's Well, is still present in the village and is still used by people who retain the tradition of visiting holy wells, for reasons that have more to do with very old custom than with any specific doctrinal instruction. The Castle of Ferns, built by William Marshall in the early 13th century and the most complete example of an early Norman circular tower castle in Ireland, has a history that the architectural historians describe as turbulent, and the local oral tradition describes as significantly worse than turbulent. The castle was the site of the blinding and castration of Diarmid MacMurchada's son in 1168, an act of political mutilation that precipitated a chain of events including the Norman invasion of Ireland, arguably the single most consequential act of violence in the history of the island. And the castle has subsequently acquired the reputation of a place where the effects of events have outlasted the events themselves by a margin that makes precise calculation impossible. The people of Ferns are proud of their history, and they will tell it accurately and with enthusiasm. And they will also, if you are paying attention, tell you about the quality of the nights in Ferns, about the light sitting differently here than in the surrounding Wexford countryside, about the fact that the cathedral ruins generate a particular atmosphere after dark that the local community has decided to acknowledge by holding its well-attended annual heritage event exclusively in daylight hours, which says more about local understanding than any explicit description would. Town number 3, Moone, County Kildare. Moone is a small village on the Barrow Valley in South County Kildare, and it has a high cross. Not a high cross in the general sense of a decorative piece of early Irish Christian stonework. The Moone High Cross is one of the most significant pieces of early medieval sculpture in Europe, a 9-metre granite shaft carved in the 8th century, with scenes from the Old and New Testaments in a style so distinctive and so remote from the Byzantine and Romanesque conventions of contemporary European Christian art that art historians have been arguing since the 19th century about who made it and what specific tradition they were working from. The figures are elongated and angular and exist in a spatial relationship with one another that seems, in certain lights, to suggest that the sculptor was working from a fundamentally different understanding of what figures in space are and how they relate to the surfaces they occupy. The cross has been in this village for 1,200 years. It is the only thing most people know about Moone, and for most purposes it is enough. But Moone has more than the cross. The village sits in the Barrow Valley at a point where the river has been used as a route and a boundary since the Bronze Age. And the field boundaries and earthworks around the village include features that the Ordnance Survey maps mark with the cautious annotation of historical interest, and that the older people of the area identify more specifically as ferry forts, raths, and places where the boundary between this world and the one adjacent to it is, to use the local vocabulary, thin. This is not a metaphor in rural Kildare. It is a description of a perceived physical reality that generations of agricultural community have incorporated into their land management. The ring forts and earthworks are not farmed, not driven over, not built on, not interfered with in any way, not because of preservation legislation, but because the local consensus is that interference with such structures results in consequences that range from the loss of livestock to the occurrence of illness, to the general category of bad luck that, in the Irish rural tradition, functions as a comprehensive explanation for misfortune without specifying mechanism. The specific strangeness of Moone, distinct from the general strangeness of the Barrow Valley, is concentrated around the ruins of the monastery that contained the High Cross, Moone Abbey, founded in the 6th century by St Columcille and abandoned in the Middle Ages, its ruins still standing in the churchyard at the centre of the village. The churchyard is active. Contemporary burials continue here. And the juxtaposition of 8th century carved granite, 12th century abbey ruins, and gravestones from the present century creates a layering of time that, in the right weather conditions, is not merely atmospheric, but actively disorienting. People who have sat in that churchyard alone on a January evening, which I have done, or wasi, Roffenbars, and which I recommend only to people who are comfortable with a very particular kind of silence that has more content than silence usually has, will understand what I mean without further elaboration. People who have not done this should perhaps consider it carefully before they do. Town number 2. Glenmalure, County Wicklow. Glenmalure is not strictly speaking a village. It is a valley, one of the longest glacial valleys in Ireland, running north to south in the heart of the Wicklow Mountains for approximately 12 kilometres between the flanks of Lungnacquila, the highest mountain in Leinster, and the lower ridge above Rathdrum. There are approximately 60 permanent residents in the valley, clustered in a scatter of farmhouses along the single road that follows the Avonbeg River. And there is a youth hostel at the valley head that operates as a base for hill walkers going onto Lungnacquila. What Glenmalure does not have is a way out, whereas except the way you came in, which is either a feature or a problem depending on your reason for being there, and which gives the valley its most obvious and most commented upon quality. It is a place you enter intentionally, or not at all, and the journey in is long enough and specific enough in its directions that arriving by accident is not a realistic possibility. The history of Glenmalure is one of a deliberate inaccessibility, deployed as a military and political strategy. The O'Byrnes of Wicklow, a Gaelic clan who remained undefeated by the English crown longer than almost any other in Leinster, used the valley as their principal stronghold from the 14th to the 17th century. And in 1580 they destroyed an English force of 600 men in the valley at the Battle of Glenmalure, at Durrow to the Scorprony, one of the most complete English military defeats of the Elizabethan period in Ireland. The defeated soldiers who were not killed in the battle were lost in the mountains, and the valley's reputation among the English administration for the following century was one of active hostility, a place that would not yield, and whose inhabitants were, by the standards of the time, effectively untouchable. The military history is the documented history. The other history, which runs alongside it and is not documented in the same way, concerns the valley's reputation as a place of older significance. The name Glenmalure, Glenmalure in Irish, is of uncertain derivation, and the suggestions offered by Celtic linguists over the years include associations with words meaning the Glen of the Watcher and the Glen of the Lament, neither of which is the kind of etymology you want attached to a place with one road in 60 residents. The Lungnacquila Massif above the valley was a place of ritual significance in the pre-Christian period. Lungnacquila itself derives from the festival of Lugnasad, the harvest festival of the god Lugh, which was celebrated at elevated sites across Ireland and which in this part of Wicklow was celebrated here at the highest point in the province, Nairyarsor Aidasda Bari, in a way that has left the mountain, with an atmosphere that experienced hill walkers describe consistently and that the official walking guides are careful not to address. The valley at night, in winter, with the river audible but not visible from the road, and the mountain above, closing off the sky to the south and west, is the kind of environment that produces in most people a strong preference for being somewhere else. The 60 or so permanent residents are, without exception, people who have chosen to live there, knowing what it is, and who have a relationship with the valley's character that is settled and unembarrassed. They are among the most specifically local people in Leinster, in the sense that their identity is entirely constituted by this particular valley in a way that has no equivalent in places more connected to the broader world. This is not criticism. It is the observation that Glenmalure produces a type, and that type does not make all visitors feel welcome. Town number 1. Kilbride, County Wicklow. Here we are, Kilbride, a small village in East County Wicklow, sitting in the shadow of Kilbride Camp, the Irish Army's artillery ranges, in the upland country between the Wicklow Mountains and the Dublin county boundary, with a population that the census counts reliably, and that locals count differently. By which I mean there is the population that is registered as living there and the broader category of people who are associated with the place in ways that the census does not capture and has not attempted to capture. This is a common phenomenon in small Irish villages, as where the relationship between the living and those who have left, and those who have not yet been satisfactorily accounted for, is treated as a single continuous category, rather than the 3 distinct ones that official counting prefers. The strangeness of Kilbride begins with its name. Kilbride, Kilbride in Irish, the Church of Brigid, places this village in the vast network of sites across Ireland dedicated to St. Brigid. Yep, the 6th century abbess of Kildare, who herself seems to have been built, in the folk tradition, directly on top of an older goddess of the same name, who was associated with fire, smithcraft, healing and poetry, and who was venerated at the Imbolc festival on the 1st of February, a festival that continues in the Irish tradition today under the name of St. Brigid's Day. The significance of this layering, pagan goddess to Christian saint, with the name the Sacred Fire, and the 1st of February date preserved intact through the transition, is that in Kilbride, as in all the other Kilbrides of Ireland, the boundary between the pre-Christian and Christian traditions is not a boundary at all, but a continuous thread, and the village occupies a position on that thread rather than a position after it. The artillery range gives Kilbride a particular atmosphere that is not supernatural in origin, but that contributes substantially to the overall effect. The deep, low concussion of artillery fire on training days rolls across the landscape of East Wicklow in a way that, if you do not know what it is, produces a visceral animal response that requires conscious suppression. The sound is absorbed by the hills and returned from multiple directions with a delay that makes the source impossible to locate. Bravo! And the fact that the army has been firing guns at these hills since 1941 has done precisely nothing to reassure the landscape about the experience. The birds on training days evacuate the surrounding woodland with a speed and completeness that is, in my view, the single most alarming regular occurrence in County Wicklow, and that is a county in which regular alarming occurrences are not in short supply. But the specific reason that Kilbride heads this list, Barv, above the ghost valleys and the druidic hills and the abandoned medieval town and the tidal mud, is this: the people of Kilbride. In my experience, and in the experience of others who have spent time there asking the same kinds of questions this video has been asking, do not talk about Kilbride the way people in the other 9 places on this list talk about their towns. In those other places, the strangeness is acknowledged, discussed at whatever length the local culture permits, and contextualized within a tradition that gives it meaning. In Kilbride, the strangeness is acknowledged with a brevity that suggests it has been discussed at length in the past, and a conclusion has been reached, and the conclusion is not one that benefits from repeated examination. What that conclusion is, I have not been told directly. I have been told on more than one occasion by people of entirely different backgrounds and ages and levels of connection to the village, that Kilbride is fine, that it is a perfectly ordinary place, and that there is nothing particularly remarkable about it. This, delivered in the flat tone specific to certain kinds of Irish conversational closure, is the most alarming thing anyone has ever said to me about a place in Leinster, and I have been paying attention for a very long time. 10 towns, 10 places in the province of Leinster, where the standard categories of Irish rural life, the pub, the church, the market, the crossroads, the field, the ruins at the edge of the village, function differently than the brochures suggest, where the local knowledge is more specific and more carefully maintained than tourism requires, and where the line between what has happened and what is still happening has been managed rather than resolved. Laragh, with its Saint's Ghost and its sound-absorbing glacial valley. Duncormick, with its unexcavated croppy graves and its undisturbed fairy fort. The Athboy, on its ancient Samhain Hill, with 2,000 years of uninterrupted ritual significance. Durrow, with its castle banshee wailing on schedule for the death of its old families. Clonmines, rotting into the mud of Bannow Bay, with its foundations sealed by local consensus. Castledermot, with its wizard earl still galloping through the hotel grounds on his 7-year schedule. Ferns trying to be a village while sitting on the capital of a kingdom. Moone, with its cross and its thin places and its cemetery that contains too much time in too small a space. Glenmalure, with its one road and its 60 people and its mountain that has been watching the province from above since before the province had a name. And Kilbride, which is fine, which is perfectly ordinary, and about which there is nothing particularly remarkable at all. That is all from me. I am your Irish grandpa. See you in the next one.